Hello, my name is Alan Singer. I am a professor of education and history at Hofstra University, located in the New York City metropolitan area. I'm videoing myself in my home office because of the coronavirus quarantine, so you can see both books and food storage here. I titled this paper, What If Our Schools Are Working? Because it is rooted in a Marxian analysis of society and schools, the subtitle is Base, Superstructure, and Hegemony in Education. It's based on a chapter I wrote for a collection on confronting capitalism in the 21st century. Two concepts in early 20th century Marxist theorist Antonio Gramsci's exploration of history and society are the most relevant for our discussion of education today: hegemony and organic intellectuals. Hegemony explains why schools as an institution in a hierarchical capitalist society operate the way they do. They are organized based on the ideology of capitalism, and they are designed to support its existence. They sort people out, decide who gets what rewards, and convince both the people who fail and the people who succeed to different extents that the system is fair and they receive its rewards based on their own individual effort and merit. The purpose of education in a capitalist society, probably any society, is to inculcate people into the system, not to transform it. Gramsci's concept of organic intellectual, however, gives us some hope for transforming the world we live in. Some organic intellectuals are the bureaucrats transmitting the hegemonic ideas of the social system. Gramsci, by the way, includes teachers in that category. But other organic intellectuals are members of marginalized classes and communities with a broader vision of possibility and the ability to convey their vision to other community members. These are potential agents for progressive social change. These are the people, as a progressive educator, I try to reach. The modern public school system in the United States and other industrializing nations initially developed to serve the managerial needs of industrial capitalism in the first half of the 19th century. It reached its maturity along with the economic system as the factory model in the 1920s and has changed very little since, except perhaps in style, as adjusted to the emergence of new educational theories, conflicting political demands, different population groups, different occupational skill requirements, and new technologies. However, we are probably entering a new phase of capitalism with new contradictions within and between capitalist institutions as robotic and computer technologies transform the notion of work and replace the need for many, if not most, workers. How many coders does the world actually need? Former United States President Barack Obama maintained that the basic job of education continues to be to prepare students to meet the workforce needs of employers for what he euphemistically called 21st century careers. Fortunately, we have no idea what those careers will be and whether human workers will be needed to do them at all. According to the 1900 United States Census, one of the most common jobs at the time was hod carrier. So I guess schools had to prepare people to be hod carriers. A hod carrier was someone who used a wooden frame to carry bricks on his back at construction sites. Will coders be the 21st century version of hod carriers once computers learn how to code themselves? Part of my argument in this presentation is that contemporary high-stakes standardized testing and value-added evaluations of teachers are structural adaptations to new computer technology that maintain the basic purpose of education in a capitalist society, and the function of schools, which is sort them out and convince them the system is fair. In the book Hard Times by English novelist Charles Dickens, he introduced us to the modern school circa 1840. Thomas Gradgrind was an industrialist and the headmaster of a school where the goal was to take little pitchers and fill them full of facts. Gradgrind School was in an English mill town during the Industrial Revolution of the mid-1800s, and his students were destined to become cogs in the machinery of a new society. Teachers, as well as students, were trained in the same way. In the chapter titled Murdering the Innocents, Gradgrind demonstrates his scientific method of teaching to a new instructor, Mr. Choke'emchild. Choke'emchild and some 140 other schoolmasters had lately turned at the same time in the same factory on the same principles like so many pianoforte legs. He had been put through an immense variety of paces and had answered volumes of head-breaking questions. Dickens Worley suggests if he had only learned a little less, how infinitely better he might have taught much more. Dickens' purpose in the book was to satirize Gradgrind and expose the dreary schools and factories. There's my phone. Hold on 1 second, please. Hello? Forget it. I'm sorry. Dickens' purpose in the book was to satirize Gradgrind and expose the dreary schools and factories where children and workers were reduced to interchangeable numbers and virtually enslaved to machinery. The scariest thing about Gradgrind School is how closely the character resembles the reality of schools in that era and today. In the early decades of the 20th century, public education in the United States was systematized using supposed scientific management efficiency concepts developed by Frederick Taylor for assembly line production at the Ford Motor Company, and they were known as Taylorism. It is a system that shapes people to the task rather than the task to the individuals. In the Principles of Scientific Management, Taylor described how he selected and analyzed the performance of highly effective workers, eliminated all false movements, slow movements, useless movements from the performance of their task, and then decided on the most efficient and profitable ways to produce products. In schools they produce people. In the United States, Taylorism was brought into education largely through the efforts of John Franklin Bobbitt, who in 1912 published an article on the elimination of waste in education, which included the principles that schools should track students into areas better suited to their abilities. After all, why waste time teaching them something that is not suited for them? In 1918, Bobbitt wrote, "Human life consists in the performance of specific activities," much like in Taylorism. "Education that prepares for life is one that prepares definitely and adequately for these specific activities." To achieve these goals, high schools were designed to operate like factories, by the clock and the bell, with students proceeding through standard curriculum at the same rate. Bobbitt also argued The school is not an agency of social reform. Its responsibility is to help the growing individual continuously and consistently to hold to the type of living which is the best practical one for him. Because of this, in this model, efficient and effective education differed depending on your social class. In his 1970 book, Future Shock, Alvin Toffler described the industrial era school this way. Mass education was the ingenious machine constructed by industrialism to produce the kind of adults it needed. The problem was inordinately complex. How to pre-adapt children for a new world, a world of repetitive indoor toil, smoke, noise, machines, crowded living conditions, collective discipline, a world in which time was to be regulated, not by the cycle of the sun and the moon, but by the factory whistle and the clock. I mean, it sounds amazing, like the schools we all attended. The whole idea of assembling masses of students, the raw material, to be processed by teachers, the workers, and a centrally located school, the factory, Toffler called a stroke of industrial genius. The classic example of this approach to education is portrayed in the classic 1986 movie, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. We see a teacher addressing a class of chronically bored students. Their heads are down on the desk and they're drooling. And the teacher says, he drones on and on. In the House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of anyone, the Great Depression passed the anyone. It goes on and on and on. Does anyone know what Bush called this? Anyone? Something to do with economics? Oh, voodoo economics. The joke was this teacher was terrible, and as a result the class was stultifying. But the lesson was not really about the Great Depression or voodoo economics. It was actually a test of who could survive this level of boredom and was ready to move on to similarly terrible and stultifying jobs in offices, warehouses, fast food joints, and factories. In the last 3 decades, new trends have added to the capitalist nature of miseducation in the United States. Zero-tolerance criminal justice, high-stakes testing, and charter schools. Automation, robotics, and globalization have decreased the need for unskilled and semi-skilled labor in advanced capitalist economies, making large sections of the former working class redundant. One solution to mass unrest caused by rising unemployment is the school-to-prison pipeline. Since the 1990s, zero-tolerance policies in schools have criminalized many normal forms of teenage behavior. Students, especially Black and Latino students, are arrested for minor infractions and started down the road for failure and self-blame. The United States imprisons a larger percentage of its Black population than South Africa did at the height of the era of apartheid. The push for national skills-based reading and math standards in the United States and the accompanying high-stakes testing are, as Pink Floyd proclaimed, just another brick in the wall. Atomizing learning and sorting, boring. Tests and test prep prepare students for the tedious nature of work, and your ability to tolerate them determines how you will be tracked. Donald Trump and his Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, in the United States, are currently promoting a dismantling of public education and replacing it with market-based capitalist solutions. I fear the shift to online instruction as a response to the corona pandemic will only hasten this process to the benefit of global companies like Pearson, who are ready with packaged online instructional material that they have been field testing in third world countries, Kenya, India, Philippines. A 1983 United States report, A Nation at Risk, charged that the country was threatened by a rising tide of mediocrity in public schools that would cripple its ability to compete in international markets. But what if the fundamental premise of the 1960 report is wrong? What if American schools are working exactly the way they are intended to work? What if every student is not supposed to learn and succeed? I want to end with some hope for the future of education. Part of the beauty of capitalist education is that in its inconsistencies, it contains within it itself elements of its own destruction. It's a Marxian idea, although I prefer to credit to the Hindu goddess Shiva, who was the goddess of creation and destruction. It's hard to convince people that failure is always their own fault when people who did everything that was asked of them cannot find work or support families in a promised middle-class lifestyle. It is also difficult to control students when you argue that capitalism means freedom and democracy, and they experience neither in school as they pass through metal detectors in a stop and frisk society. This brings us back to Gramsci's notion of organic intellectuals. Organic intellectuals are members of marginalized classes and communities with a broader vision of possibility and the ability to convey their vision to other community members. While many organic intellectuals are recruited to join the upper echelons of society, some remain within their class and represent their class. Teachers are not the organic intellectuals of the dispossessed. They are hired to serve the system, and they are very rarely from the disposed or identify with them. But teachers can play a role in social transformation. They can make use of the inconsistencies, the cracks, the seams in the education system and society to repair and support organic intellectuals amongst their students. Progressive teachers working with inner city disenfranchised youth have to learn how to break arbitrary or oppressive rules and get away with it. They need to find ways to manipulate the system in order to protect their students from injustice, create safe places for learning, and design lessons that connect with students' lives and motivate them to learn and to organize. Can anything be done to change our schools and society and eliminate some of the gross inequalities short of revolutionary turmoil? I hope so, but I'm not sure. But a first step is to admit that schools in the United States and other advanced capitalist nations are not failing. Unfortunately, they are working exactly the way they are designed to work. Thank you very much.